I was 33 when I stopped trusting maps. Before that summer, I treated a blue trail line like a promise. If a map said a road existed, it existed. If it said a ridge had a lookout point, you could stand there, drink your water, take a photo, and feel briefly superior to the rest of civilization. Then I went to Calder Basin. I had been driving north for 6 days after a breakup that had ended with one ugly sentence and a suitcase in the hallway. My ex had not cheated on me. That would have been easier to understand. She had simply told me that being around me felt like living next to a locked door. I had no good response to that, so I did what emotionally gifted men have done for centuries. I loaded my car with hiking gear and drove toward a place without cell service. Calder Basin was an abandoned watershed in eastern Oregon, closed to the public after a landslide took out a service road years earlier. On old maps, the basin still had a dotted route leading to an obsolete snow survey tower. The ranger station in the nearest town had a printed warning on the door telling people not to enter after rain. Naturally, that was exactly the kind of warning I found appealing. I parked beside a rusted gate just after noon. The sky was white and heavy, but the forecast had promised only scattered showers. I had a thermos, a first aid kit, a headlamp, a paper map, and a pocketful of small brass survey tags I used as temporary route markers. I tied them to low branches with biodegradable twine, then collected them on my way back. It was a system I had used for years. Pretentious, maybe, but it worked. The forest began quietly. Not peaceful quiet. Quiet like a room after someone has said something unforgivable. No birds, no insects, no wind in the cedars. For the first hour, I kept waiting for the basin to wake up around me. It never did. The only sound was my boots sinking into wet needles and the soft clink of the brass tags against bark. There were signs that people had once worked there. A cable half swallowed by moss. A collapsed plywood sign with the word HYDRO still visible beneath the rot. Every so often, I passed shallow wooden stakes in the ground, each painted with a faded blue stripe. They formed a line deeper into the trees, but they were too old to mean anything. I stepped over them without thinking. At 2007, rain started. It was not heavy, but it came cold and straight, turning the trail into a black ribbon of mud. I decided the tower could wait. I turned back, following my tags downhill toward the gate. The first thing I noticed was that one of them had been moved. I had tied a tag to a split cedar at shoulder height. Now it hung near the ground, from a root on the opposite side of the tree. I stopped and stared at it. There were only two explanations. Either I had made a mistake, or someone had touched it. I told myself I had made a mistake. Humans will believe almost anything, as long as it prevents them from having to feel afraid. 20 minutes later, I found another tag tied to a branch I had never passed. It pointed away from the road and toward a narrow ravine full of alder brush. I cut it loose and put it in my pocket. By the time I reached the gate, the rain had become a steady hiss. My car was still there, but the road behind it was not. A fresh chain had been looped through the metal gate. It was locked with a bright orange construction padlock, new enough that rainwater still beaded on it. I had parked on the wrong side of the gate, the side that had just become a cage. For a few seconds, I stood there with my hand on the cold chain, waiting for the situation to become ordinary again. Then I saw my driver's side door. It was open. I never leave my car open in the woods, not because I am especially careful, but because I am annoyingly suspicious of squirrels. The glove compartment had been emptied onto the passenger seat. My paper map was gone. My spare phone charger was gone. The loose change in the cup holder was untouched. On the dashboard, someone had placed one of my brass tags. It had been bent into the shape of an arrow. It pointed back into the forest. Beside it was my emergency blanket, folded into a perfect square. I always kept it in the first aid kit beneath the rear seat. Whoever had taken it out had put it back with more care than I ever had. That detail frightened me more than the missing map. A thief takes what he wants. A prankster leaves a mess. This felt like someone had searched my things with patience, then arranged them so I would understand that every hidden pocket, every zippered pouch, every private little habit of mine had been noticed. The rainwater ticked against the roof of the car. Somewhere in the trees, metal struck metal. Once, a small, clean sound, like one brass tag tapping another. I checked my phone even though I already knew there would be no signal. The rain had soaked through my jacket collar. My car still started, but the gate was locked, and the slope beside it was too steep to drive around without rolling the whole thing into the creek. I considered breaking the chain with the tire iron. Then, I looked at the fresh mud around the gate. There were prints everywhere. Not one set. At least 4. They came from the trees, crossed the road, circled my car, and disappeared into the forest on the other side. The shoes were all different. One had a wide work boot tread. One was narrow, almost pointed. Another was bare, with toes pressed deep into the mud. I did not like the bare footprint. Thin grooves crossed between the tracks, as if someone had dragged a wire through the mud. The only place I knew I might find reception was the snow survey tower. It stood on the ridge above the basin, maybe 2 miles from the gate. I packed my headlamp, water, knife, and emergency blanket. I left everything else locked in the car, which was ridiculous, because the car had already been opened by someone who did not care about locks. Before I left, I used my marker pen to write my name and the date on the inside of the windshield. If anyone found the car later, I wanted them to know I had not abandoned it willingly. The climb to the tower was worse in the rain. The path had narrowed into a channel of slick clay, and every cedar branch seemed positioned to slap water into my face. Twice I heard movement behind me. Not footsteps exactly, more like someone sliding a hand along wet bark. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it followed. I made it to the ridge just before dark. The tower was a steel platform on 4 legs, maybe 15 feet high, with a small wooden cabin bolted to the top. Its windows were clouded with grime. The ladder shook when I climbed it, and every rung complained loud enough to announce my arrival to the entire basin. Inside, I found an old desk, a broken radio, and a wall covered in penciled lines. At first I thought they were weather notes. Then I looked closer. They were names, dozens of them, written in columns. Some were crossed out. Beside each name was a date and a number. M. Harlan, 8/14/3. D. Lopez, 9/02/1. C. Reed, 10.11/4. Near the bottom, written in darker pencil, was mine. Evan Mercer, 6/23/0. I had not told anyone where I was going. Beneath my name was a second line in smaller handwriting. No, red. I searched my clothes without understanding. My jacket was charcoal. My pack was black. Then I remembered the bright red bandana tied around the handle of my water bottle. My sister had given it to me after our father died, because apparently relatives respond to grief by handing you fabric and hoping it becomes emotional infrastructure. I took it off and stuffed it into my pocket. On the desk lay a yellowing aerial photograph of the basin. Most of it had been covered with marker lines. The lines did not trace roads or streams. They radiated from the tower in circles, each labeled with the same numbers I had seen beside the names. 1, 2, 3, 4. The outermost circle was marked No Return. I climbed onto the narrow platform outside the cabin and held my phone above my head. 1 bar appeared. I called emergency services before it could vanish. The dispatcher kept asking for my location. I gave her the basin name, the closed access road, the tower, the locked gate, the footprints, the open car, the writing on the wall. My voice sounded calm in the way people sound calm when they are one breath away from breaking. She told me units would be sent from Pine Hollow, but the storm had washed out part of the highway. It could take hours. Stay somewhere visible, she said. Then the signal cut out. Below me, in the trees, something flashed. Not lightning. 3 small white lights blinked in sequence. 1, 2, then they vanished. A moment later, a 4th light appeared much closer to the tower, directly below the ladder. It blinked once and stayed on. I backed away from the window. I went back inside the tower and turned on the old radio, not expecting anything. Static filled the cabin. Under the static, very faintly, someone whispered my name. Not once, again and again, again. The voice did not sound like it came through the speaker. It sounded as if the radio had merely given the cabin permission to say it. Then the static cleared for 1 second. A man spoke, close to the microphone. "Do not take the red one down." The radio died. I did not sleep in the tower. I wrapped the emergency blanket around my shoulders and sat with my back against the desk, staring at the trapdoor. I tried to count my breaths. At 50, I would stand up, check the windows, and sit down again. At 100, I would open the message thread with the emergency dispatcher and stare at the word "sent," hoping it meant more than it probably did. Every few minutes, I heard the ladder shift beneath the cabin. A metallic creak. A pause. Another creak. Each time, I aimed my headlamp at the trapdoor, expecting a face to rise through it. Nothing did. At some point after midnight, the rain stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I had two choices: stay trapped in that tower until someone arrived, or move before the people below decided to stop playing with me. At 1040, I climbed down. I did not use the trail back to the gate. I headed east, keeping the ridge on my left and the creek far below on my right. My plan was to reach the old flood channel, follow it south, and eventually cut across to the county road. It was a bad plan, but it was a plan. Humans cling to plans the way drowning people cling to furniture. For nearly half an hour, nothing happened. Then I saw the first light. It was tied to a branch ahead of me, a tiny camping lantern glowing blue through the trees. Under it hung one of my brass tags. I had put every tag I found in my pocket. They were still there. The tag on the branch was not mine. It was identical, down to the scratched edge and the same twisted wire loop. Someone had copied them. The copy even had my personal scratch mark, a small triangle I had made years earlier while sharpening a knife. Nobody could have seen that detail unless they had handled the tags in my car for a long time. That was when I understood the note in the tower. The numbers were not dates of disappearances. They were directions. They had been watching hikers, studying what they carried, learning how they moved through the forest, building trails inside other people's trails. I walked faster. The land dropped sharply into the flood channel, a wide scar of gray stones and fallen timber. At the bottom, half buried beneath brush, was a long concrete culvert leading into the hillside. I would have passed it if I had not heard a generator. The sound was low and steady, hidden under the rush of water. I crawled closer. Inside the culvert, someone had built a room. Plastic sheeting hung from the ceiling. Battery lanterns glowed along the walls. There were crates of canned food, fuel canisters, climbing ropes, stolen backpacks, and boxes filled with car keys. Dozens of keys. On a folding table sat a notebook. I opened it. Each page listed a vehicle make, a color, a plate number, and a date. Some entries had check marks. Others had a word written beside them. Gidden, L-E-F-T, Wenend, Look Bait, Gilon. Mine was on the last page. Silver Subaru, OR 621 KVN, alone, markers. Underneath, someone had written, USE, the tower. Below the line was a crude sketch of the tower cabin. A red square marked the chair where I had sat. Beside it was a time. 23. I looked at my watch. A branch snapped behind me. I dropped the notebook. For a second, nobody moved. Then, a voice came from the trees. Put it back. It was a woman's voice. Soft. Close. I ran. I ran through the flood channel, slipping on stones, smashing my shins against deadwood, hearing feet strike the ground behind me in different rhythms. There were at least 3 people, maybe more. They did not shout. They did not threaten me. They made bird calls, short whistles. 2 notes, then 1. Answers came from farther down the basin. They were guiding each other around me. The calls were not random. They made a moving fence of sound, steering me toward the far side of the channel, toward a patch of trees where I could see blue lanterns waiting between the trunks. I changed direction at the last second and slid down a mud bank so hard I tore my palm open on a stone. I reached the creek and jumped in without thinking. The water was high and brutal, but it carried me around a bend and out of their sight. I crawled onto the far bank, shaking so hard I could barely hold my headlamp. My phone buzzed. A single message had come through before the signal died again. UN Canoe number. You walk past the gate. You do not walk past us. I stayed in the creek until the cold became its own kind of danger. The red bandana in my pocket felt strangely heavy. I pulled it out, tied it around a broken branch, and placed it on the far bank where the creek split. It was childish bait, but I wanted them to think I had crossed toward the woods. 10 minutes later, I heard the bird calls gather around that branch. The people in Calder Basin knew the forest. I knew water. I grew up fishing with my grandfather, and he had taught me that creeks have patterns. They cut low roots through bad terrain. They lead somewhere, even when the people around you do not want you to leave. I followed the current south. For 2 hours, I moved in short bursts, stopping whenever I heard anything except water. Once, I saw a headlamp sweep across the trees above me. I pressed myself under an overhang and watched the beam pass over the creek without touching me. Near dawn, the channel widened, and the trees gave way to concrete. A dam. Not a large one, just an old flood control barrier, forgotten by whatever agency had once built it. A maintenance shed stood beside it, leaning at an angle. The door was unlocked. Inside was a landline phone mounted to the wall. I picked it up, expecting silence. There was a dial tone. I almost laughed. It came out as a sob. The emergency operator answered on the second ring. I gave her my name, the dam location painted on a faded plaque, the culvert camp, the notebook, the car keys, the people in the woods. She told me to stay inside and keep the door barricaded. I used a steel shovel and a stack of sandbags. Then, I waited. Waiting is not passive when you are afraid. Waiting is work. You listen. You count. You try to recognize the sound of an engine before it becomes the sound of a person breathing outside a door. At 6,026, I heard a vehicle. At 6,020, I heard another. And voices. Real voices. Loud, impatient, ordinary. Sheriff's office. I opened the door so fast, I nearly fell down the steps. There were 3 deputies, 2 search and rescue volunteers, and a woman from the county water department. I kept trying to explain everything at once. The tower, the names, the copied markers, the culvert, the chase. One deputy asked me to repeat the basin name. When I did, the water department woman went pale. She told me Calder Basin had been closed after a private contractor disappeared during a flood survey 12 years earlier. Since then, there had been reports of illegal campers, stolen vehicles, and missing gear. But nobody had ever found a permanent camp. They found mine before noon. I rode in the back of a county truck with a thermal blanket around my shoulders, pointing through the rain at the place where I had entered the culvert. The deputies moved carefully this time. They had radios, rifles, a K9 unit, and a drone that buzzed above the flood channel. The dog stopped at the culvert entrance and refused to go inside. The handler pulled twice. The dog planted its paws and growled at the dark. The culvert was empty. No plastic walls, no generator, no backpacks, no notebooks, only wet concrete and a single brass survey tag nailed to the ceiling. My tag. The one I had bent into an arrow on my dashboard. My car was still at the locked gate. The chain had been cut open. The glove compartment had been put back together. My paper map sat neatly on the passenger seat, but the writing I had made on the windshield was gone, not wiped away, scraped away. The deputies searched the basin for 2 days. They found boot prints, broken branches, and a fire ring near the tower. Nothing that could prove what I saw. No one ever called me a liar. That would have been easier. They did find one thing in the tower, a red bandana, dry despite the storm, tied around the radio antenna. It was not mine. Mine was still knotted to the branch at the creek split. They just looked at me with the polite, exhausted concern people use when they suspect trauma has rearranged your memories. I sold the Subaru 3 months later. I stopped hiking alone, and I stopped using maps that show forgotten places. The strangest part is that I still receive messages from unknown numbers once or twice a year. They never say much. Sometimes it is only a photo of a brass tag hanging from a tree. Sometimes it is a sentence. W.E. Keith the first map. Last week, I got another one. It was a picture of my apartment building. Under it, someone had typed, "You always leave a way back."